Shaq just said what nobody dared to say. What if I told you one of the biggest legends in NBA history just publicly questioned whether the most hyped young superstar on the planet has what it takes to become truly great? Not his talent, not his size, not his skill, his mentality, his killer instinct, and the entire basketball world immediately stopped and listened, because when Shaquille O'Neal speaks, people pay attention. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't Shaq joking around on television. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't another harmless hot take designed to create headlines. This felt personal. It all started after a frustrating performance from Victor Wembanyama. The numbers weren't terrible, but they weren't dominant either. Missed shots, missed opportunities, moments where the game seemed to be asking for a superstar takeover and never fully got one. Then came Shaq on national television, in front of millions, looking directly into the camera and delivering a message that instantly sent shockwaves across the NBA. According to Shaq, Wembanyama has to be better. Not someday, not next season, right now, because superstars don't get judged when everything is easy. They get judged when the pressure is crushing, when the crowd is hostile, when every possession feels like a season-defining moment, and in Shaq's eyes, Wembanyama wasn't passing that test. The criticism didn't stop at shooting percentages. It didn't stop at shot selection. It didn't stop at basketball strategy. Shaq began questioning something much bigger, whether Wembanyama possesses the ruthless competitive fire that separates stars from legends, the kind of fire that made Michael Jordan terrifying, the kind of fire that drove Kobe Bryant every single day, the kind of fire that turned Shaq himself into one of the most dominant forces basketball has ever seen. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about points, rebounds, or blocks anymore. It became about identity, about character, about whether the future face of the NBA is truly built for the brightest spotlight. And that's where things became explosive. Because Victor Wembanyama isn't just another young player. He's the player many believe could define the next decade of basketball. The player expected to carry the Spurs back to greatness. The player expected to become the league's next global icon. So when a Hall of Famer publicly questions his mentality, every fan, analyst, former player, and executive starts asking the same question. Does Shaq see something the rest of us don't? Or is he creating a narrative that could follow Wembanyama for years? What happened next would turn this story from a simple criticism into one of the most fascinating NBA dramas we've seen all season. Because Victor Wembanyama had a choice. Respond with words. Respond on social media. Respond through reporters. Or respond the old school way. The way legends prefer on the court. And trust me, what happened next may have changed this entire conversation. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your city and country in the comments. And if you think Shaq was right, comment 1. If you think he went too far, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter reveals why this criticism may have been building for months behind the scenes. The part Shaq got right? Here is where the story gets complicated. Because if we are being honest, Shaq was not completely wrong. That is what makes this drama so dangerous. If Shaq had only said Victor Wembanyama needed better shot selection, most serious basketball people would have agreed with him immediately. When you are 7'4", when you can see over every defender on the floor, when your release point is almost impossible to contest, taking 10 three-pointers in a difficult game raises real questions, not because Wembanyama cannot shoot. He absolutely can. That is part of what makes him terrifying. But there is a difference between having the ability to shoot from deep and letting the defense push you away from the most dangerous areas of the court. And that is what Shaq was really reacting to. He looked at Wembanyama and saw a young big man with once-in-a-generation tools drifting too far away from the paint. He saw a player who could punish smaller defenders, force double teams, collapse the defense, and create easy offense for everyone around him. Instead, in certain moments, Wembanyama was settling. That word matters. Settling is what great defenses want superstars to do. They want you taking the shot they can live with. They want you avoiding contact. They want you turning a physical mismatch into a jump shooting contest. Shaq spent his entire career destroying teams that allowed him deep position. So from his perspective, watching Wembanyama float around the perimeter probably felt almost impossible to understand. Shaq's basketball point was fair. Wembanyama does need to become more ruthless about attacking mismatches. He does need to demand deeper catches. He does need to punish defenders who have no realistic chance of stopping him one-on-one. That is not hate. That is championship level expectation. But the problem is what happened after that. Because Shaq did not stop at basketball. He pushed the conversation into mentality. He started talking like the issue was not just where Wembanyama was catching the ball, but whether he had the internal fire to dominate when the moment demanded it. And that is a much heavier accusation. A missed shot can be corrected. A bad decision can be fixed on film. A weak possession can become a teaching point. But when someone questions your competitive character, especially on national television, that follows you. That becomes a label. And labels in the NBA can be brutal. One bad week becomes a pattern. One quiet reaction becomes a personality flaw. One rough fourth quarter becomes proof that you are not built for pressure. That is the dangerous part of what Shaq did. He took a real basketball criticism and wrapped it inside a much bigger story about toughness, leadership, and killer instinct. And once that story enters the public conversation, it becomes almost impossible to control because fans do not always remember the details. They remember the headline. Shaq questioned Wembanyama's heart. That is the line people will repeat. That is the phrase that will follow every missed shot, every late game loss, every quiet post-game interview. So yes, Shaq had a point, but the way he delivered it turned analysis into a challenge. And for a young superstar like Wembanyama, that challenge was never going to disappear quietly. Why this pressure is different? Victor Wembanyama has never been treated like a normal prospect. From the moment the NBA world discovered him, the conversation around him became almost unfair. He was not introduced as a promising young player. He was introduced as the future, the next face of the league. The kind of talent that does not simply join a franchise, but changes the direction of the entire organization the second his name is called on draft night. That is a blessing, but it is also a burden because when you arrive with that kind of hype, people stop giving you normal development time. They stop judging you like a young player learning the league. They start judging you like a finished superstar before you have even had the chance to become one. That is what makes Wembanyama's situation so unique. He is still young, still learning NBA physicality, still learning how teams adjust to him night after night, still learning how to carry a franchise where every mistake becomes content, every bad game becomes a debate, and every quiet moment becomes evidence for someone's agenda. But because he looks so impossible, people forget he is still developing. They see the height, they see the wingspan, they see the blocks, the handles, the step back threes, the impossible finishes, and they expect dominance every single night. No patience, no grace, no room for normal growth. That is why Shaq's criticism landed so loud, because it touched the biggest fear surrounding Wembanyama, not whether he has talent. Everyone knows he has talent. The fear is whether he can become the kind of player who controls the emotional temperature of a playoff series. The kind of player who walks into a hostile arena and makes the building feel quiet. The kind of player who does not just produce numbers, but imposes his will. And that is the exact standard Shaq represents. Shaq was not subtle. When he entered his prime, he did not negotiate with defenses. He overwhelmed them. He forced teams to foul. He forced coaches to change lineups. He forced entire franchises to admit they had no answer. So when Shaq looks at Wembanyama, he is not only seeing a young star, he is seeing someone being discussed as a future all-time great, and Shaq knows what that level demands. The problem is that Wembanyama's greatness may not look like Shaq's greatness. Shaq's dominance was loud, physical, and impossible to ignore. Wembanyama's dominance is stranger. It is longer, quieter, more unpredictable. He can block a shot without jumping fully. He can erase a passing lane by standing in the right place. He can bend an offense just by being near the rim. He can make players hesitate before they even attack. That is power too. It just does not always look like the version of power Shaq respects most. And that is where the conflict begins. This is not only old school versus new school, it is old dominance versus new dominance. Shaq wants to see force. Wembanyama often wins through control. Shaq wants to see visible aggression. Wembanyama often shows silent calculation. Shaq wants a monster in the paint. Wembanyama is trying to become something basketball has never fully seen before. And when a legend judges a new kind of superstar through an old standard, sparks are guaranteed. The narrative Shaq started building, the most powerful thing in basketball is not always a stat. Sometimes it is a story. Once a story attaches itself to a player, it can change the way everyone watches him. That is what Shaq may have started with Wembanyama. The numbers were only the doorway. The real story was much bigger. Is Victor Wembanyama too passive? Does he avoid contact when the game gets rough? Can he take over late? Does he have that cold-blooded switch? Those questions are dangerous because they cannot be answered in one night. And that is exactly why they spread so fast. If Wembanyama scores 30, people can still ask if he did it when the game mattered. If he blocks 5 shots, people can still ask if he controlled the fourth quarter. If the Spurs lose, people can still say the numbers were empty. That is how a narrative works. It moves the goalpost. It creates a test that never fully ends. And Shaq understands that better than almost anyone. He has spent years in basketball media. He knows how one strong statement on national television can become the frame through which millions of fans watch the next game. That is why the timing mattered. Shaq did not say this after Wembanyama dominated. He said it after a rough performance. He said it when the young star looked vulnerable. He said it when fans were already frustrated, when critics were already searching for a weakness, when social media was ready to turn one game into a verdict. That timing made the comment explode. Suddenly, every Wembanyama possession had a new meaning. If he shot a three, people called it settling. If he passed out of a double team, people called it passive. If he stayed calm, people called it soft. If he showed emotion, people said Shaq got in his head. That is the trap. Once the narrative is built, almost everything can be twisted to support it. And for a player like Wembanyama, that is especially difficult because his personality is not loud. He is not constantly performing toughness for the cameras. He does not need to scream after every basket. He does not chase viral moments just to prove he cares. He is controlled, measured, internal. That style can be powerful inside a locker room, but on television, it can be misread. American sports culture often expects greatness to announce itself loudly. Fans want the stare, the roar, the chest pound, the quote after the game that sounds like a movie trailer. Wembanyama does not always give them that. So people fill the silence with their own interpretations, and Shaq's words gave those interpretations a powerful voice. But here is what makes this story even more interesting. Wembanyama did not fight the narrative with words. He did not call Shaq out. He did not complain about unfair criticism. He did not try to win the public argument. That takes discipline, because most young stars would feel the pressure to respond instantly. They would post something cryptic, they would mention respect, they would say they heard the noise. Wembanyama did none of that. He let the noise build. He let people talk. Then he walked into the next game carrying the weight of that question. Are you built for this? And what happened next became the first real answer. Wembanyama shows silence. After Shaq questioned his killer instinct, Victor Wembanyama had every reason to respond. A Hall of Fame legend had challenged his mentality on national television. Fans were debating his toughness. Clips were spreading everywhere. Every sports show had a new angle. But Wembanyama did not post. He did not complain. He did not fire back through the media. He stayed silent, and that silence mattered, because Wembanyama understood something powerful. If you answer with words, people can twist them. But if you answer on the court, the game speaks for itself. The next matchup was no longer just another night on the schedule. It became a test. Every possession carried pressure. Would he attack the paint? Would he demand the ball? Would he play through contact? Would he disappear when the defense got physical? At first, it was uncomfortable. The defense crowded him. The paint was packed. Every touch felt difficult. This was exactly the kind of environment Shaq said would reveal who Wembanyama really was. But Wemby did not panic. He adjusted. He fought for better position. He used his length with more purpose. He stayed locked in defensively. He changed the rhythm of the game without needing one loud quote or dramatic celebration. His answer was not loud. It was not made for social media. It was basketball. And sometimes that is the strongest response a young superstar can give. The game turned into a test. The next game was never going to feel normal. Not after Shaq's comment. Not after the entire NBA world started asking whether Victor Wembanyama had enough fire inside him. From the opening minutes, the pressure was obvious. The defense was waiting for him. Every time Wembanyama touched the ball, bodies shifted toward him. The paint closed fast. Passing lanes disappeared. Nothing came easy. This was not a night built for highlights. This was a night built for answers. And early on, the answer looked uncertain. Wembanyama missed looks he normally makes. He got pushed away from his favorite spots. The defense forced him to think instead of letting him play free. For a young star, that can be dangerous. One bad stretch can turn into frustration. One forced shot can become three more. One mistake can make the entire arena feel heavier. But Wembanyama stayed calm. That was the first sign. He did not chase the moment. He did not try to prove Shaq wrong with one wild possession. Instead, he started reading the game. When the defense crowded him, he moved the ball. When the paint was packed, he repositioned. When the offense slowed down, he found ways to impact the game without forcing shots. That is what many people missed. A real answer to criticism does not always come from scoring 40 points. Sometimes it comes from refusing to break when the game becomes uncomfortable. And that is exactly what happened. As the game went deeper, Wembanyama became more physical. He fought harder for space. He made defenders feel his size. He stopped floating and started planting himself in places where the defense had to react. Then the momentum began to shift. Not with a flashy step back three, not with a loud celebration, with defense, a contest at the rim, a rotation that erased an easy layup, a possession where the opponent thought they had an opening, only to realize Wembanyama had already closed it. Those plays do not always dominate highlight reels, but coaches see them, teammates feel them, opponents remember them. That was the moment the game changed, because Wembanyama was not just surviving pressure anymore. He was controlling it, and for the first time since Shaq's comments, the narrative started to crack. His real answer came on defense. Most fans wanted Victor Wembanyama to answer Shaq with points. They wanted a huge scoring night, a monster dunk. a dramatic stare into the camera. Something loud enough to go viral. But Wembanyama's real response came in a different form. Defense. And that may have been even more important. Because scoring can be emotional. Scoring can come and go. A player can get hot for one quarter and still not control the game. But defense under pressure reveals focus, discipline, timing, and toughness. That is where Wembanyama began to speak. The opponent attacked the rim expecting space. There was none. They tried to move the ball quickly before he could recover. He recovered anyway. They tried to pull him away from the paint. He still found a way back. That is the strange power of Wembanyama. He changes decisions before the shot even happens. Guards hesitate. Big men rush. Wings take one extra dribble they do not want to take. Even when he does not block the shot, he changes the possession. And in this game, that presence became louder with every minute. One possession showed everything. The offense created what looked like an easy path to the rim. For a split second, the lane was open. Then Wembanyama appeared from the weak side, stretched out that impossible reach, and erased the opportunity before it could become a basket. That was not just athleticism. That was timing. That was awareness. That was pressure meeting preparation. A few moments later, he did it again. Not by chasing a highlight, but by making the right rotation at the right time. The kind of play that does not always make casual fans jump out of their seats, but makes coaches rewind the film. That is when the tone changed. The same player being questioned for toughness was now making the toughest plays on the floor. Not talking, not arguing, just taking away points. That matters because killer instinct is not only about taking the last shot, sometimes it is about refusing to let the other team breathe. Sometimes it is about locking down the rim when your offense is not perfect. Sometimes it is about making the game feel smaller for everyone else. Shaq wanted to see force. Wembanyama showed control. Shaq wanted to see aggression. Wembanyama showed impact. And while those are not the same thing, they can both win basketball games. That is why this response was so fascinating. Wembanyama did not become Shaq. He did not try to copy an old school version of dominance. He answered in his own language. And that language was defense, timing, patience, and present. What Wembanyama still must fix. Now, this is where the story needs balance. Because Wembanyama answering Shaq does not mean Shaq had no point. He did. And if Wembanyama wants to become more than a superstar, if he wants to become one of the defining players of his generation, there are areas he must improve. The first is late game control. For long stretches, Wembanyama can dominate without forcing anything. He can score, protect the rim, rebound, pass, and change the entire feel of a game. But in the final minutes, when every possession becomes heavier, he still needs to impose himself more consistently. That does not always mean shooting. It means demanding the ball in dangerous spots. It means attacking before the defense gets comfortable. It means making the opponent feel that every late possession belongs to him. That habit is not automatic. It has to be built. The second area is shot selection. Wembanyama's three-point ability is real, but it cannot become an escape route. When defenders are relieved to see him standing outside instead of fighting near the basket, that is a problem. He is too big, too skilled, and too unique to let defenses push him away from the paint. A three-pointer can be a weapon, but the post can be a punishment, and Wembanyama has to learn when to use each one. That is the part Shaq understands deeply. When you have a physical advantage, you do not simply use it sometimes. You make the defense deal with it again and again until they have no good answer left. The third area is leadership. Wembanyama does not need to become loud. He does not need to fake a personality that is not his, but he does need to expand his presence. Great players do not only lead with numbers, they lead with standard. That can be a look, a demand for the ball, a defensive call, a moment where teammates feel, without needing a speech, that the best player is taking responsibility. Wembanyama is already respected, but the next step is command, and command takes time. That is the important part people forget. He is still building. The finished version does not exist yet. What we are watching is the construction of a future franchise leader in real time. There will be awkward moments. There will be rough shooting nights. There will be games where the pressure looks bigger than him, but those moments are not proof that he lacks greatness. They are the places where greatness gets built. Shaq may have challenged him harshly, but buried inside that criticism is a standard Wembanyama can use. Not as an insult, as fuel. Wembanyama does not need to become Shaq. The biggest mistake in this debate is thinking Victor Wembanyama must prove himself by becoming another Shaq. He does not. Shaq was power, force, noise, and total physical dominance. His greatness came from overwhelming teams in the paint and making every defender feel helpless. But Wembanyama is different. He dominates through length, timing, control, defense, shooting, and impossible angles. He does not need to scream after every play or perform toughness for the cameras to prove he cares. Some stars lead loudly, others lead quietly, and in San Antonio, there is already a perfect example. Tim Duncan. He built a dynasty without chasing attention, because his consistency made his leadership impossible to question. That may be the real path for Wembanyama, not becoming Shaq, not copying anyone, but building his own version of killer instinct, calm, cold, patient, and relentless. Because if Wembanyama's quiet fire becomes consistent, the NBA may be facing something even harder to stop. The lesson behind the pressure: in the end, this story is not only about Shaq and Wembanyama, it is about pressure. Shaq challenged him because Shaq knows what greatness demands. He knows talent is never enough. At the highest level, every superstar must prove they can survive criticism, physical defense, rough nights, and public doubt. But Wembanyama also showed something important. He does not need to answer every attack with anger. He does not need to become loud just to prove he is strong. He can listen, adjust, grow, and respond through the game itself. That is the real lesson. Criticism can destroy a young player if it becomes noise, but if handled the right way, it can become fuel. The strongest athletes are not the ones who never get questioned. They are the ones who keep improving after the questions get louder. Shaq's standard may be harsh, but Wembanyama can use it. Not to become Shaq, not to copy old greatness, but to build his own version of great. More physical in the paint, more confident late in games, more vocal when his team needs direction, more willing to control the moment instead of waiting for it. And for fans, maybe the lesson is patience. Greatness is not built in one night. It is built through pressure, failure, adjustment, and maturity. Wembanyama is not finished. That is what makes this story exciting. The narrative is not closed. It is just beginning. Shaq asked the question, Wembanyama has started giving the answer, and the rest of the NBA should be watching very carefully. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another NBA fan. Now comment below. If you believe Shaq was right, press 1. If you believe Wembanyama will prove everyone wrong, press 2.